With the release of Kung Fu Panda 4, I'm gonna rank all 46 Dreamworks animated movies that were released in theaters. So, movies like this and this won't be on this list. And many other ones. Without further ado, let's begin. In last place, we have Spirited Untamed. This movie was boring. It was extremely boring. This movie just feels fake. Of what I'm aware of, this movie was only made to set up a show that they had an idea of later down the line, I think. But yeah, I'm surprised this was made from Dreamworks. There's like no life into this project. And like, just no spark. It's dumb. Every decision is stupid. It's a pain to sit through. Absolute pain. It's probably the shortest movie on this list. And it felt like the longest. But in 45th, we have Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. I don't think this movie was helped by following up Puss in Boots The Last Wish, because it's another boring one. It's not as boring as Spirited Untamed, but this movie is also another drag to sit through. And it just has an uninteresting plot. I feel like it's kind of predictable, and you can kind of see where the story's going. But I mean, like, there's some originalness to it somewhere, but when the movie first came out, huge disappointment. The trailer promised something else, and we did not get that. Watching the movie now, it's still a disappointment. It's still bad. It could have been something better, and I feel like the trailer promised something way better. But in 44th place, we have Shrek the Third. Boy, after those first two Shrek movies, they put this out, and it does not really help. This movie doesn't really have the same flavor that the first two Shrek movies had. The comedy is not there, not as well made. It's kind of cringy of how bad the comedy is. The song, because the soundtrack in the first two Shrek movies, memorable, catchy pop music. This one, nowhere near that. The movie takes everything great about the first two movies and ruins it. Spits it all over the place, and it's not there. But in 43rd place, we have B-Movie. This movie's, like, hilarious. Not in a good way. It's cringy. Terrible dialogue. Terrible dialogue. Terrible writing. Terrible jokes. Now, it starts off pretty good, but then when you get through the movie, you have a bee falling in love with a human, a bee going to court, bad writing, and bad dialogue. That's now a meme. This movie tries to be funny when it's not. And this movie is trying to tackle too many things at the same time when it's not a smart idea to tackle all those things at the same time. But in 42nd place, we have Monsters vs. Aliens. I remember of this movie before I rewatched it again. I thought it was a pretty good movie. Boy, was I wrong. I mean, like, it starts off pretty decent, not great, but it starts off just a fine movie. You can enjoy it. But then, by the end of the movie, it's just like, what is really happening? You don't really have any good jokes in here. They're kind of repeated jokes that already were established before. And they just kept reusing them, and it didn't really feel right. And just, it doesn't really make for a great movie just because of the way certain things are just executed, and it doesn't really work fully with the concept of what everything is happening in. It's not a great movie. It's not a good movie. It's kind of bad, but it is what it is. 41, we have the first Spirited movie. Now, I know there's a lot of fans of this movie, but I'm not one of them. This movie came across as boring, not really exciting. There's not a lot happening. It's just basically a horse just going through some problems. Not interesting. I found this movie another dull, boring movie. At least it's better than the sequel, even though it's not really a sequel. Not my thing. I found it boring. A lot of people are fans of it though, which I can appreciate the mature story in here. I do appreciate that, but everything else I found too boring. But in 40th place, we have Boss Baby. Now, it's enjoyable enough. Like, you have fun, like, you have a fun plot idea that I feel like you don't really execute it well. You could have executed it way better to really pay off what you promised us. But I feel like just the direction they go with the main plot point is not good enough. And I feel like could have been way stronger. At 39, we have Home. This movie, basically the same problem as Boss Baby. You have a fun concept, but you don't really execute it well. I feel like some things are just left unexplained and could have really been tackled a little bit better. Because basically throughout the entire movie, you're just driving to a destination and then trying to deal with another problem that wasn't really explained how that problem was there. If something was fixed, which I was a little confused on that. And I feel like just the overall movie isn't that great because you just have interesting ideas that don't really get paid off well. Same problem with Boss Baby, but a little bit better because I'm kind of like alien movies. At 38, we have Abominable. I found this movie boring. Now, I find the jokes just not funny. Like, I see the joke in there, I just don't find it funny at all. It's just not great jokes when it's trying to be funny. The overall story I do like, but I just feel like the main movie doesn't work. Like, I like the idea of, like, the father's death and stuff. Like I said, I like the idea of the story, but the jokes don't really help that story. I do like the characters, though. I do like some of the character arcs in here, but movie definitely could have been stronger and more entertaining than it actually was. Number 37, we have Puss in Boots, the first one. Now, compared to the second one, which we will talk about way down the line, this one, I don't really know what happened with this movie, especially compared to the sequel. Just comparing it to the sequel, though, story's not as strong, villain's not as strong, side characters are not as strong that are not in the sequel. Just doesn't really work as a movie as itself. Just interesting character choices. And yeah, this movie's enjoyable, you can enjoy it, don't get me wrong, but just definitely could have been stronger. But at 36, we have Penguins of Madagascar. Now, I like the Madagascar trilogy, which we'll talk about later, but this spin-off doesn't really work. Now, I do think it's a smart idea making a movies on the penguins, because in my opinion, they're probably the best part of the Madagascar trilogy. So I do think making a movie on these characters could work. But I feel like you needed a more interesting story. Now, because like the villain's okay, story's okay, but I feel like if you actually made a better story, it made each penguin have a character arc better, instead of like only 2 or 1. I feel like definitely you could have had something, but with the way everything was just concluded, I feel like it definitely could have been way stronger of a movie. But at 35, we have Boss Baby Family Business. Now, I do think this movie is better than the first one just because of like the theme, and I feel like it's strong. I feel like the comedy's better, and I feel like the story is just a tad bit better. But I enjoyed this movie, but it's not great either. It's not good either. I wouldn't really recommend this movie. It's just the main problem with this movie is kind of the problem with the first movie. It's just that you have a good concept, but you could have executed it way better. But in 34th place, we have Turbo. Now, I don't really have much to say here. It's just that, like, the villain kind of plot twist, it's not really a plot twist. I feel like this kind of, it's not really a villain. I feel like that's just what a person like that would do. Just because that's kind of like their job. So, but I do feel like the theme is something that could have been better, but is nice. Turbo is about Snell who gets powers from a car. Like, what was exactly injected into him? Because we see later in the movie that once his shell's broken, he can't go fast anymore. but his body, like his skin, is not in that shell. So obviously the shell got the fuel into it. I'm confused on how this whole thing works. Movie is confusing. But in 33rd place, we have Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. I read the books when I was younger. I really enjoyed them. This movie, watching it now, it's just filled with potty humor, which is a choice. But I feel like sometimes they're just really diving into that, and I feel like is this necessary? Like, it does match the books, but is this much potty humor actually necessary? I don't think so. Now, yes, Kevin Hart does really steal the show here. I feel like he's able to bring more enjoyment into this movie, but I mean, like, this is good enough that I would recommend this movie, but if you really like potty humor, this is probably your thing. Everything from this point forward, everything above this, I do feel like I would recommend it. Everything that was below this, besides Captain Underpants, I would not recommend. But in 32nd place, we have Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted. Now, I feel like this movie really works when we actually tackle Europe's Most Wanted, when they're running away from animal control. I feel like that part really works, especially the first 20 minutes of the movie, where it's kind of like a spy on the run movie. I love that part of the movie. But then when we get to the circus bit of the movie, it starts degrading and is not as strong. In 31, we have Antz. Now, I feel like the first half of this movie is really strong. I loved what they did with the first half of this movie. But the last half of the movie, where they're actually, like, out of the anthill, exploring the world, I wasn't as entertained. I loved the first half of the movie, and the last half of the movie really destroyed it for me, and just did not work at all. But in 30th place, we have the first Madagascar. Now, I do wish this was higher, but I feel like on this watch around, I kind of noticed that when the actual, like, plot took place, like the one with Alex actually at the place and what he does there, when that plot takes place, we have 20 minutes left of the movie. I was 50 minutes into the movie. The plot with Alex wasn't really kicked in yet. But I feel like now looking back on all of these rewatches, I wish this one was higher, but I needed to rewatch it to rank it higher. And I just didn't have the time to rewatch it again. But I enjoyed this movie. I just feel like the main plot point definitely could have been longer. But in the 29th place, we have Kung Fu Panda 4, a new one. Now, this one takes everything great about the first three movies and just takes the few elements out that makes those movies special and spits this out. This movie's still enjoyable, you can enjoy it, but it's missing those elements that made the first three movies good. Like, the humor's gone, certain characters are missing, and just the plot's just not as strong, but enjoyable. But the new cast is entertaining enough, the villain's entertaining enough, but it's missing that flair. In 28th place, we have Shark Tale. Now, I like the plot of this movie, I do think it's really interesting, but my main problem with this movie is that I do not find the main character relatable. I do not find them likable. There is nothing I like about this main character of the story, which makes me struggle to enjoy this movie. Now, I know not a lot of people like this movie. I really enjoyed the plot of this movie. It's just that the main character, the main fish of this story, I did not like at all. But in 27th place, we have Shrek Forever After. Now, I do not think this movie's great, but I'm a fan of, like, multiversal time travel-ish stories. So this movie's kind of my thing. Seeing what happens if Shrek never existed is really what happens. And I'm a fan of, like I said, I'm a fan of these types of stories. So, it was all my thing. But again, it kind of runs into the same problems that Shrek the Third ran into. It doesn't have the same humor as the first two movies. It doesn't have the same songs as the first two movies. And it's just not as iconic and good as those first two movies were. But I can enjoy it for what it is. But in 26th place, we have Croods: A New Age. Now, I like this movie, the first 45 minutes of it, when we didn't really have the banana plot happening, but then once we introduced the banana plot, the movie got way over the top, especially with like the other tribe that was trying to follow the main three people that were taken. And everything just got way over the top. I did not know what was happening in the movie. It was not what the first 45 minutes were, and just became extremely over the top. Which bumps it down, but I enjoyed the first 45 minutes, so I can enjoy this movie. By the 25th place, we have Trolls Band Together. Now, I'm not a fan of like boy bands or stuff. I wasn't really around when that kind of stuff was big. So, this movie didn't really appeal to me. In my opinion, this is the worst Trolls movie. And just the songs do not appeal to me. I feel like the songs in the first two movies are way better. I feel like the story in the first two movies are way better. But since I'm a fan of the Trolls trilogy, I like this movie. I like the Trolls movie way more than most people do. But this one just didn't have those flares that I liked about the first two movies. Because I'm more of a pop song person, which were the first two movies more. So, and I also feel like the first two movie stories were stronger. But I still enjoy this one. But in 24th place, we have Flushed Away. Now, this movie is just, when watching it, you're questioning the villain's motive. But once it wraps up fully, I feel like it works. I just feel like it kind of addressed that sooner. So, you're not just questioning everything that's happening. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I kind of really did like the plot of it and everything that was happening. My main problem with this movie is that I just feel like could have definitely been stronger on a story level, and they could have definitely told the story in a better way to have it flow better. In 23rd place, we have Sinbad and the Legend of the Seven Seas. Now, this was the first time watch for me, and I surprisingly enjoyed it. I liked like the villain's motive and like the deal they had with the hero and stuff. It's just that definitely could have been more enjoyable. I do feel like you could have made it more enjoyable at least. It's enjoyable enough, but I feel like a story like this could have definitely had that big old spark that really signified that this could have been a way stronger story. I do like this arc that the character goes on in the story that he is set up to go on. Just definitely could have been a way stronger story and definitely a longer movie, because I feel like there's a lot to be told in this world, and you could have definitely spent more time with the story and really fleshed it out better. But in 22nd place, we have The Croods. Now, I enjoy this movie more than the second one, at least. Like the growth of the caveman, and we get to see like just fake inventions that we obviously know what they look like in the future. I just find that funny. I find this whole movie just a lot of fun to watch. It's just a fun little adventure to put on. But in 21st place, Trolls. Like I said, I like the Trolls movies. This one has all that pop music I like, the adventure they have on in here. I know a lot of people don't like this movie for problems that I will never know. It's just that I feel like this movie, the only problem with this movie is that you have a story about Bergens eating trolls by also having like fart jokes. Which, those two stories don't really line up. But in 20th place, we have Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Now, like I mentioned before, I'm a fan of time travel, multiversal type stories. So, again, this story really appeals to me. I enjoy like going back in history, making like history puns. I'm not a history type of guy, but I'm a time travel type of guy. So, this type of story really appeals to me. I love the story of like Mr. Peabody adopting a boy. And I just like this time travel story part of it. It's just, can't get over the top kind of complicated kind of mess, especially the ending. I don't really understand how this type of time travel rules work with that ending and what they set up beforehand. But other than that, I enjoy it. In 19th place, we have Madagascar Escape to Africa. Now, in my opinion, this is the best Madagascar movie. I feel like just the comedy is definitely the standout here. I feel like this is the best comedy, especially with the monkeys and the penguins. That's why I feel like Penguins movie could have worked. But yeah, I feel like this one has the best story because each character has their own group Each one has their own arc, and each one has like their own comedic moment that really works. Now, on that note, my only problem with this movie is that there are so many side stories happening all at the same time that it's hard to keep track of them all. We have one with an old lady, one with the penguins, one with Alex, one with Melvin. There's so many more. They're all over the place, and they all connect at the end, but they're just kind of all over the place. And sometimes we see a character in one scene with some random scene that's not even important, but they come together at the end, but that scene didn't really need to be there in the first place. So, just a bunch of scenes, but it all works. By the 18th place, I have Over the Hedge. Now, this movie really surprised me. I love the plot that they have in here, with a raccoon now being threatened by a bear, finds this group of people who need to collect food when they're hibernating. Over the hedge they go. There's a neighborhood where they steal food from. Plot surprised me, story surprised me. Not as funny as I would want it to be. I do feel like there's some predictable elements that I do feel like definitely could have been fixed up a lot. But other than that, in 17th place we have Trolls World Tour. In my opinion, the best Trolls movie. I also know that this movie technically didn't release in theaters, but it was supposed to, but COVID got in the way, so it's on this list. For me, this is the best one because I feel like the humor is the best part. It doesn't really have that potty humor with trolls being eaten alive. It has like this nice pop music kind of feel. Like I said, I like pop music earlier, and this movie's filled with that. So I love all that. I feel like the comedy just works better than the first movie did because it's not all like goofy. I mean, like the humor is still goofy in here, but it's not like goofy. And I feel like just the overall story is just way stronger as a whole as the other two movies. But in 16th place, we have Rise of the Guardians. Now, I do feel like this movie does have a really good plot with believing in these creatures in order for you to see them. And I feel like just Jack Frost becoming a guardian is a very clever plot. But I feel like the villain, for all these guardians to really team up against, you could have used a stronger villain in Nightmares or Dark or whatever it is. I feel like you could have definitely used a clever villain to have Santa Claus and Easter Bunny to go against with instead of like Sandman's villain. I feel like it's a good villain, but I feel like with all these characters, I feel like you could have done something a little bit different than Nightmare. But in 15th place, we have Prince of Egypt. Now, I was surprised with how mature the story was. And I really like how they were able to mix like a musical kind of story with the mature story of this movie. I was all in for the mature story. I like the plague part too, with like the musical numbers and like all the themes, dark themes in here. I was all in for that. It's just a little slow at some parts, but I was really surprised with how dark this was. In 14th place, we have the Road to El Dorado. This is just a fun story. I do like them lying to be gods in this movie. I feel a tad bit too long at some parts, but I feel like the jokes do land. All the characters do really work. And like I said, I do enjoy this story. This is just a fun movie. In 13th place, we have Kung Fu Panda 3. I do like this movie a lot more than other people do. I do feel like the comedy in here is really strong. Not as strong as the other two, but really strong in here. I do like the story in here. Basically, everything I like about this movie is carried over from the first two, which I will talk about later. It's just my only problem with this movie is that some characters don't feel the same. Like the Furious 5, for example. I feel like they're a lot more goofy in this movie than they were in the first two movies. But in 12th place, we have How to Train Your Dragon 2. Now, in my opinion, this is my least favorite How to Train Your Dragon movie, but love the villain, love the plot. As we will see later, the other How to Train Your Dragon movies I really enjoy. And this is just another good installment into this trilogy. And I do feel like that this is another great installment to continue the story of Hiccup and Toothless to see where they go later. Now, I will address the third one later, but for the most part, I do feel like that this movie left off in a way that feels like you can close off this trilogy in a satisfying way. In 11th place, we have the bad guys. I love the plot in here. I love the characters in here. I haven't read the book, but I really enjoyed this movie of like these bad guys becoming good guys and trying to do good now because they really feel they're good guys. I do think you can really make a sequel out of this movie. If you were asking me what original Dreamworks movie that came out recently would you want a sequel of, I will say the bad guys because, well, it would be called the good guys now. But I feel like you can really make something good for this movie. I feel like what they executed was really good. It's just that runtime problem came across again. Definitely could have been chopped up. But in 10th place, we have the first Kung Fu Panda movie. Now, again, my main problem with this movie is the runtime. I don't know if it's because I watched it way late at night, but this movie felt way longer than it actually was. But I love the plot in here. The plot in here is just a nice Kung Fu plot about a panda who's be the dragon warrior. And you can do a lot with this type of plot. And just the way everything was able to close off, I was a fan of that. Like I said, my only problem is the runtime though. But other than that, I really like this movie. In 9th place, we have Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Now, I do not love this movie like a lot of other people do, but I can appreciate it for all the work and time that was put into like the stop motion, because I know stop motion movies are hard work. And this movie is able to take every little bit of detail and build it all up into something very satisfying. And it makes for a fun, like kind of detective, kind of Halloween kind of movie because of just everything that they're able to do and really grasp everything. And I'm a fan of this movie. I just don't love it as much as other people do. In 8th place, we have Megamind. When it comes to Megamind, to this day, I do feel like that this plot for this movie is extremely original. Just because you take a story about a villain who becomes a hero. And to this day, we haven't really gotten a plot like that. We might have, I just don't remember it on the top of my head, but it wasn't as good as this movie. We have Megamind falling in love. And spoiler alert, we see Metro Man being killed, but then in the plot twist for me, he was alive. So I feel like this movie did a lot of good stuff that really worked. And to this day, original idea like this hasn't really been met yet. But in 7th place, we have Chicken Run. Now, I watched this movie for the first time last year, and it really worked for me. But this time around, it worked for me even more. I loved this movie. I was able to appreciate the type of storytelling that they were able to tell, because you kind of have like this rooster that shoots into a barn, and these chickens who are trying to escape in like a prison kind of style, which I was a fan of, because like a prison break movie I do really like. And this rooster, like we know it as an audience that a rooster can't fly, but the characters can't. And the reveal for that, I found did really work as a whole and was really strong. And just the way everything wrapped up at the end, I was a big fan of. In 6th place, we have How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. Now, like I said, I will talk about this when I mentioned How to Train Your Dragon 2. My only problem with this movie is that I feel like the way How to Train Your Dragon 2 left off, I feel like this plot could have definitely been stronger. Now, I do feel like this is one of the better. I do feel like this is one of the top 3 best Dreamworks villains in the movie. But my only problem with this movie is that I feel like throughout the story, having Toothless and Hiccup separated for almost a whole movie, I feel like that's just not a satisfying way to end the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. But I do feel like everything else works. The ending really works, especially with that F-log. And just, yeah, I feel like this was a great send-off. It's just, I feel like Hiccup and Toothless, I feel like they were more together throughout the movie. We are now in the top 5. In 5th place, we have Kung Fu Panda 2. Now, I love how we get more of the Furious 5 in this movie. In fact, the Furious 5 are the main characters in this movie. And it works because This movie is a great follow-up to the first one, and you're able to see like the mission the Dragon Warrior goes on as he learns his inner peace, and you really have like the story of, it's also another funny one with humor throughout it. You have another good story with not my favorite villain, but a pretty good villain in the Kung Fu Panda movies. And I just really enjoyed the plot of this movie and what they did here. But in fourth place, we have Shrek 2. This one basically takes everything great about the first movie, transfers it into here. I love the plot of Shrek meeting Fiona's parents because that's just something that would come across, and it just works. It's not like something that feels forced. It feels like something that will actually happen in this universe and just really work, and is a great sequel to the first one. The comedy's there, the music is there, the story is there, all of it's there. It's just not as strong as the other things on this list. In third place, we have Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. In my opinion, this is the best Dreamworks villain that we've gotten to this date. Don't want to spoil it just in case you haven't seen the movie, but the villain really works. Loved everything they did with that. And just like main theme of the story really works for me. I'm surprised that compared to the first Puss in Boots movie to this, complete change of story. I loved everything they did. And they teased Shrek 5 at the end of the movie. So I cannot wait for what they're about to do with everything, continue this universe. Because if it's on this level, they can do something right. But in second place, we have the first How to Train Your Dragon. This movie, loved the plot. For this movie, I was surprised by it. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, but I do not remember this movie being as good as it was. I was completely shocked with how good this movie was. Just like the dragon story on its own, really good. Now, I do think, because next year, the live-action version of this movie is coming out, and I'm all in for that, surprisingly. I do feel like you can do a lot with that. And I feel like just the story they have in here, with like the dragons and stuff, you can definitely make that live-action movie into something. And if that works, they can do that for the rest of these Dreamworks movies. But in first place, we have Shrek. This movie is in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. When it comes, like I said before, for all the other Shrek movies, comedy, song, all of it's amazing. All of it just matches the tone of this movie. And this movie is just an original plot about an ogre saving a princess from a tower. Original plot, everything works out. Great comedy, like great comedy. Like this is the best comedy in a Shrek movie. Like all the jokes they were able to do, love them all. Everything about this movie is great. I seriously have nothing bad to say about this movie. But finally, that was my ranking of all 46 animated Dreamworks movies that were released in theaters. Thank you guys for watching. If this video interests you, maybe these ones will too. Thank you guys for watching, and see you guys all next time. Goodbye.